in this video, we're going to be looking at how to create a multi-client server architecture in C#. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So what you want to do is create an empty folder. I'm going to call this folder server code. So once you've created this empty folder, we then go into Visual Studio Code. So we open this empty folder in Visual Studio Code. There we go. Opening the empty folder in Visual Studio Code. So what you want to do here is go to your terminal, right? So here in my Explorer, I have this terminal right here. But for you, if you do not see the terminal, you can go to this top menu bar right here and click the terminal and say new terminal. Okay. But for me, I have this terminal here, so I might as well just close all of these and just go to the terminal right here and say .NET new console. So this should effectively create a console application. Okay, so once we've created this console application, there will be template code, right? So I'm just going to go to this program.cs, right, and go to the right. As you can see, it's opened right here. So what I'm going to do is simply clear this code that already exists here to start with a clean slate. And then I'm going to import a few packages. So follow along. I'm going to using system, right? And then using system.net, using system.threading.tests, and finally, not finally, using system.task, and finally using system.net.sockets. Alright, so once you have these, and you must have these, okay, otherwise you'll experience errors when you run your code. So now we can just go to the fun part. You can say class, and we name our class multi-client server. You can name it whatever name you want, you can give it to. Right, okay, so we have this named multi-client server here, and then we're going to create two instance variables. So we're going to be private, static, TCP listener. I'm going to make this nullable, and I'm going to call it server. Alright, so this is transmission control protocol. It basically listens to incoming client connections. Alright, so and then I'm going to create the port, private const int port. Alright, I'm going to give it any name. Any number. I'm just going to say 5000, but you can give it any number you want. So this basically accepts, listens to incoming client connection requests. Alright, so it keeps listening for that. So what we're going to do now is create the main method. We're going to say static async task main. So what async task does is prevent any client that connects to our server from blocking other clients. Okay, so that's why we need this async task. So basically what we're going to do now is actually instantiate the listener. So we're going to say server equals to new TCP listener, and then we're going to put any IP address for now. So accept any IP address dot any, and then we're going to pass in port. Alright, so the port is the port that we created at the top. Okay, this one. Okay, just remember that each and every client that wants to connect to the server must also have knowledge of this port right here. They must know this port. Okay, so now we can just start the server. So server.start. Alright, and we can tell ourselves that the server has started. Server started listening on port. Okay, so we have actually created a server, and then the server has started listening. But remember that the server needs to be able to accept clients. So this is how we accept clients. For that, we're going to need a loop that runs forever. A loop that runs forever. So we're just going to say while true. Right, so this is what is known as a loop that runs forever. This is what known as the infinite loop. Okay, so inside this loop, we want to constantly be accepting new clients, because remember, we want to be actively listening and constantly accepting clients as they want to be accepted, right? So that's why we need an infinite loop to listen forever. Okay, so then we constantly want to accept clients here. So what we're going to do is say var client equals to await, right? And then we're going to say server dot accept clients, no, TCP clients async. All right. So this line right here effectively accepts a client connection, right? We might even write and say console.write line and say client connected. All right, because once this code is executed, once a client is accepted, right, they would have connected to our server. So that's why we write this here. Okay, once the client has connected, we need to be able to handle communication with the client. So we need to create a function, handle client async, and then pass in the client. Right, so let's actually create this function, handle client async. So we're going to go here, straight here. All right, just below the static async main method, we're going to say private static async void handle client async, and then the client type is a TCP client, and then client. Okay, so once we have this method signature correctly, we then need to create a stream of information, therefore a network stream. A network stream which sends and receives information to and from client. Okay, so we're going to say client.getStream. All right, the function of this is to send and receive information from client. Okay, send and receive information from client. This is what we know as a network stream, and it receives the information in bytes. So make sure that you send and receive information in bytes. We're going to actually see this later on. So we're going to say string now message, right? This is to store a string information, right? This is to read the information that is sent to and from client. All right. Now that that's done, let's create a try and catch block to handle any errors that might occur. So we're just going to catch, and we're going to say exception. Exception. Okay, and then we want to know what went wrong. So we're going to say console.error.print error. So you say ex.message. So we're just going to print any error to the console. And then finally, so whatever happens, we want to make sure that we close our connection with the client gracefully. So we're going to say client.close. And then we're just going to say the client disconnected. All right, so now that we have our catch and finally block written, we can go to the try block. So to the try block, what we're going to do is open an infinite loop. So we're going to say while true, we're going to write an infinite loop, and then we want to create a storage, right? A 1 megabyte storage. So we're going to say bytes. We're going to say buffer. The storage you're going to call buffer, and say new byte, right? And we're going to create 1 megabyte of storage. Okay, because we're dealing with text here, right? We don't need anything large. Okay, so once we've created this 1 megabyte storage, we then need to fill it with data, obviously. So what we're going to do is say int byte read. Remember what I said about the network stream, right? It sends and receives information from a client in the form of bytes. So that's why we're going to call stream here, stream, right, stream dot read. Sorry, I said client here. I was supposed to say, okay, please come back here to this line, right, and change this client to stream. This is a stream variable, so we're gonna say stream. All right, so now that I've changed this to stream, I'm gonna come back here and say stream dot read async. Okay, read async, and then I store whatever I read from the stream into the buffer. Right, remember I'm accepting bytes, so that's why this buffer is in bytes. Okay, so I'm saying buffer, and I'm going to start from 0 to buffer dot length, to the size of the buffer, right? Any information that is extra is going to get lost, because we're saying here buffer dot length. So we want to read from 0 to the size of the buffer, and whatever information we receive, we store it in the buffer itself here. Okay, so once we store that, we need to be able to read it in human readable format, right? Not in bytes. But before we do that, we must check if the client is still connected. So we're going to say byte read and check if it's 0. And if it's 0, then we just break because the client has disconnected somehow. This is when the client disconnected. So if this is true, then the client is disconnected, we break. But if it's not, then we continue to read the information. So what we're going to do is say message, right, from this message variable that we created here, right? We're storing information in a readable format now, which means we need to decode it. So we're going to say encoding. I know it's actually decoding it, but it's saying encoding. That's fine. Encoding.utf8.getString. This is the decoding part, right? We get string from the byte. So get string. Oh wow. Get string, right? And say buffer, because we stored the bytes in the buffer, and then we say 0 and then 2 bytes read. Okay, so from 0 to the bytes read length, right? The bytes read is actually read here. Okay, so that's why we put this byte read here as the length. If you like, you can also just say buffer.length, right? But I'm gonna stick with bytes read. Okay, so now that we've read the message, we've actually decoded the message, we can actually print it to the console. So console.writeLine, and then print the message from the client. So just say message from client, and then we just append the message. All right, with this, we have just successfully read the message from the client, right? An incoming message from the client. But what if we want to send a message back to the client? So what we want to do here is say byte again, because we can only send messages in bytes. Remember that. So you're going to say byte array, and then we're going to say response equals to, and then you're going to say encoding, right, dot utf8 dot get bytes. Remember what I said, that the stream can only send and receive messages in bytes. So that's why we start with encoding first, right? We're saying encoding.get bytes because we wanna convert this message. We're gonna say server, and then we're gonna send the client back their own message, right? So we're just gonna say message, right? So this is effectively sending the message that the client sent to us back to them, right? We're actually echoing the message, okay? But now we're converting this message back into bytes. That's why we're saying here get bytes instead of get string, because we are encoding it. Why are we encoding it? Because remember that stream can only send messages in bytes. So what we're gonna do then is say await, right? And then you're gonna say stream, right? Instead of read async, we're gonna say dot write async, right? Async. Okay, and then we're gonna say response, and then we're gonna say 0, and then response dot length. All right, but wait a minute. What I did here is say I wait, right? I need to always say I wait here when I'm dealing with stream.write async. Whenever I'm dealing with async, I have to put this await here, right? As you saw earlier here, I did do that as well with the server. When I was accepting clients async, I said I'd wait. So I actually have to do it here as well. If you notice, you can see that here I say stream.read async, but I do not put await here. I should have actually done that. So I'm gonna say await. Okay, so I just added await here. Just check that you have this here and check that you have this here as well. All right. So with this, we have effectively finished writing our server code. This is our server code in its entirety. All right. So what we can do now is just run the code to see if everything is working perfectly. Okay. So what I'm going to do is pull in the terminal here. Okay. Clear everything here. Right. And just say .NET run. This is to check if everything is in order. There might be errors, but we can fix them if there are any errors. Let's just see. Okay, as you can see, we have errors. In line 52, right, we're missing a semicolon. So let's go to line 52 and see where we're missing that semicolon. And as you can see, this is line 52, and this is the semicolon that we missed right here. So I'm putting the semicolon in line 52. I hope you did put it. So you can see here, line 52, we put the semicolon, and then we get back to the code. So we have to run this in the terminal again. So .NET run. Okay, so it seems now that everything is running correctly. As you can see that the server started listening on port 5000. So now that we have the server code working, let's now go and code the client code. So I'm just gonna leave the server running like this and minimize. Okay, so right here now, I'm gonna create another empty folder and I'm gonna call this one client code. Okay, let me just correct that. I put a / here for no reason. I'm gonna say click. Okay, yeah, so create a folder called client code and then also open it in Visual Studio Code. Right. So now that we've opened this folder in Visual Studio Code, all we have to do is go to the terminal. Just like we did with the server, we're gonna go to the terminal right here. Remember what I said, if you don't see this terminal here on the Explorer, you can just go to this terminal tab and say new terminal. All right, but for me, I'm gonna have this terminal right here. So I'm just gonna say .NET new console, just like I did with the server. I create a new console application. Right, when it's created successfully, you should have these files, right? So I'm gonna go to the program.cs file. Now that it's open on the right, I'm gonna just collapse that and clear this code right here. So what I want to do now is do a simple import. So what I'm gonna do is say using system, and then I'm gonna say using system.net.sockets, and lastly I'm gonna say using system.text. All right, so here I'm only gonna need these 3 packages. So now let's get started writing the fun part. So we're gonna say class, and then we're gonna name this client code. All right, so all we need here is just one instance variable. We're gonna say private const int port. Remember what I said about the port. It has to be the same as the server port. So remember on the server, we said it was 5000. So here we also have to say this 5000. Right, so what we're going to do now is create a static main method. So we're going to say static void main. Okay, so inside the static main, we want to say try, right? And then we want to catch any exceptions that might occur. So we're going to say exception, and we want to print whatever exception happens. Okay, so I'm gonna say error, and then we're gonna append ex dot message, right? We wanna print any message that happens. Okay, so in the try block, what we wanna do is, firstly, we wanna create a network stream, right? Sorry, no, not a network stream. First, we wanna create a client, right? We want to connect to the server. So what we're going to do is say TCP client, right? And we're going to say client equals to new TCP client, right? And then we want to pass in the IP address, right? So we're going to say 127.0.0.1. So you recognize this as your local host, right? Local host address, and then comma, and then we pass in the port, right? And then we want to say console.writeLine, and we're going to say client connected to server, or we're just going to say connected to server. That should be fine as well. So we're connected to server. Now what we want to do is create a network stream. Network stream, just like we did before with the server. I'm going to call this stream, and we're going to say client.getStream. Alright. After creating that, we can now create our infinite loop, right, to maintain communication with the server. Infinite loop, which will be while true. And then inside the infinite loop, what we want to do is first send information to the server. We want to send the information to the server, but what kind of information? Well, that is when we are going to accept input from the user. So what we want to do is first prompt the user to enter a message. So we'll say console.write, and we want to say enter message. Okay, so this will prompt the user to enter a message, and then we want to store this message in a string message. So we want to say console.readLine. Alright, and then we check if this is empty, then we want to just say string.empty. Alright, now remember what I said about a stream, right? We can't just send this message, right, straight to the stream, right? We need to first convert it into bytes. So in order to do that, we need to say int byte read. Right, and then you're going to say encoding.utf8.getBytes, and then we just simply pass in the message. Okay, after that, all we'd have to do is this is supposed to say byte array. This is bytes array, and then this is information or data. Okay, so we're actually getting bytes, so we can't store them in an int variable. We actually have to store them in bytes. Alright, so just make sure that this is saying bytes and then data. Actually, you can name this whatever you want, but I just named it data because we're actually converting this string message into bytes and then storing it in this data byte. Okay, now that we have this as bytes, we can just go ahead and send it through the stream, because the stream can only send the same messages in bytes. We then just say stream, right, .write, and then we just pass in the data. And with this alone, we have effectively sent data to the server. Right, now we don't have to use async here because this is the client code, right? The client is just a single source, right? We're not dealing with multiple connections here. We're just dealing with one client communicating to the server. Okay, so in this case, in the client code, you don't actually have to use async or task. Okay, so that's why you just say stream.write. Okay, now that we are able to send message to the server, let's actually receive a message from the server. So receiving messages. Remember, we need to store that message. So we're going to say byte is equals to response, right? Server response equals to, and then we allocate some storage. So we might as well allocate 1 megabytes here as well, right? So after that, we need to transfer this message into the storage, right? We need to transfer the message that we receive from the stream into this response storage. So we're going to say int byte read this time, and then you're going to say stream.read, because stream receives data in bytes. So we're going to say stream.read, and then we're going to store the bytes that we collect in, the bytes that we read into this storage response right here. So that's why I need to pass in response. And then you pass in 0, and you say response.length. Okay. So now we need to convert this message into readable format, right? So what we can do is say string, right, message from server, okay, equals to, and then we convert by saying encoding .utf8 dot get string, and then we pass in the response, right, and then 0 and then byte read. Okay, so we've effectively converted the message from bytes, right, into a readable string format. Now we can just print this message back. The message that we get from the server, we need to print it so we can see if we're actually getting any feedback or response from the server. So we can just say message from server, print message from server. And that is it, guys. Just make sure that everything is correctly written. Okay, but in any case, we should just run the code and check if we are messing up anywhere. All right, but this is it. This is the entire code. By the way, that we have our server that is still running. Now, if I just go ahead and actually go to the server code, this is the server code. As you can see, it's still running, right? Server started listening on port 5000. Right, let's go to the client side. So in the client side, I'm just going to open the terminal and actually run the code. So I'm just going to say .NET run to see if there are any errors or we are good to go. Okay, so as you can see here, we have connected to the server, right? We've connected to the server and we are ready to start sending messages to the server. That is very good. Let's go back to the server code and check. So as you can see in the server code, it is written client connected. Now let's actually send a message. So I'm going to go back to the server code and say, so the client code, sorry, and say, hello. All right. So the server actually sent me back my message. As you can see here, I answered message hello, and the server responded with hello again. Okay, let's go back to the server and check if that's actually working. As you can see, message from client, hello, right? The server also received the message from the client saying hello. But remember, this is actually a multi-client server application, meaning we actually have to connect multiple clients in order to test if this is actually working for real. So what I'm going to do is, you're going to have to watch this carefully now. Okay, what I'm going to do is go to the client code and actually exit. So I'm going to close this program. I'm going to close this program. And as I'm closing this program, you're going to see on the server, it's going to be written client disconnected. As you can see, client disconnected. Right, let's actually open the folder where the client code resides. Okay, so this is the client code. What I'm going to do is open this in the terminal. So I'm going to open this in the terminal, but you can also open it on your CMD if you're on Windows or Bash. Okay, so I'm opening this client code on the terminal. Right, I'm going to first run the first instance of the client. So I'm going to say .NET run. So as you can see, my client has connected, right? So I've connected to the server, and if I go to the server right here on Visual Studio Code, you can see that client connected, right? But watch now. If I actually open another instance, right, another terminal like this, see, I can also execute the code to create another client. So I'm going to say .NET run, right? So this will effectively create another client. All right, let me just extend this. So as you can see, again, it is written on the server now that another client connected. So client connected, client connected. Two clients have connected to the server now. Right, and if I actually communicate and say this is client 2 here, as you can see, the server receives a message from client 2. And if I go back to this tab and say client 1, right, as you can see, the server receives a message from client 1. Client 1, client 2. I can also add as many clients as I want, right? So just write the code, test it out, see how it works